business. Flowers, trees, fruit and veg, letter by letter, they're all coming up a treat. Everything we're looking at today begins with the letter
T. Here's what's coming up. We're training trees with Alan Titchmarsh.
Provided you've got an inside leg measurement of more than 24 inches, you'll see exactly why they're called step-over apple trees.
Rachel de Tame visits a garden that is a cut above the rest.
It's the best, the oldest, and certainly the most extensive topiary garden in Britain.
And a fight against blight. Can Alice Fowler save her tomatoes?
This structure is the only thing that's keeping me and the tomato in hope that we'll still get ripening fruit.
Just some of the treats we have in store.
But let's begin with a wildflower that originated in Asia and then exploded in popularity across Europe to such an extent that in the 17th century, a single bulb could sell for thousands of pounds. T is for tulip.
Let's meet a couple of gardeners who've got a real passion for them.
We bought the property in 1994. It had been empty for 3 years, but previously owned by a sisterhood of Anglican nuns. And of course the house has got huge history because it dates back to the 16th century. And prior to that, there was a structure on the site that's underneath the 16th century part that was part of the Benedictine monastery. When we first decided to open the garden to the public, we opened in 1998, so we've been open 10 years now. And our first thought was to plant 2,000 different roses. But of course they start to bloom late May, early June. And there's a huge season in front of all that. Now, why would your visitors come to you in March and April if you've only got roses? And of course, by underplanting the rose beds with thousands and thousands of tulips, we have a magnificent display of colour and interest for quite a long time because we've planted over early, mid and late flowering species so that there's a lot going on over a 5, 6, 7 week period, depending on the weather.
Well, varieties.
And of course, the whole great explosion of interest in tulips occurred during the 17th century, when of course this house was already established, people were living here, life was going on. So it has lived through all that, and it seems therefore quite appropriate that we represent that.
We plant on average between 15 and 20,000 tulips every year, so at this point in time there's something over 135,000 tulips in the ground.
But we tend to find that we get a good 3 years out of 80% of the bulbs. Some multiply, some we don't see again.
You find that any that are sort of strong reds do seem to be the ones that will come up again and again and again. Probably the best performing tulips are the Darwins in the cottage, aren't they? They're very strong.
I'm particularly fond of the species tulips, and we've got several different varieties growing down here. And it's on a side of the house that, although predominantly in the shade for a lot of the day, this particular bed juts out and catches the sun for most of the time and suits this particular group of tulips extremely well. The Tulipa sylvestris that you see here is known as the leafy tulip, and in fact it was also known as the weed of the cultivated land. So apparently it turned up in vineyards. And there were times when the odd vineyard might be seen as bright yellow just because of the tulip that was growing at the feet. And it's thought that maybe they found their way into large areas of Europe, Italy, France in particular, simply because they moved with the vineyard stock. I think this is gorgeous for its just bright, sunny yellow colour. Cheers my spirits.
This one, in fact, is the apricot parrot tulip, and they were around when the Dutch had all their mania for tulips. And you'll see them in the early sort of wonderful flower paintings, the Dutch canvases. They sort of disappeared, but they have been rebred, and this is what we're now getting. And I think they are absolute knockouts.
Wow, just look at these. Another type of species tulip. This is Tulipa clusiana tinca. And the colours in the petals are just gorgeous. This lovely pale lemon inside colour, and on the outside suffused with a pinky red. Absolutely adorable. And the petals opening up as if to the sun, saying, soak me up, love it, love it. As long as they're happy with us, as long as we're meeting their needs and we can keep them healthy, we'll carry on planting them. I mean, now he knows that there's 6,500 varieties out there.
Right,
and he's a bit of a train spotter.
I've only got 500 of them. I've got another
dear.
6,000 to go. Oh.
Dear me.
Tulips are not tricky flowers to grow, but it's still worth following these tips offered up by Monty Don.
I love tulips. I love everything about them. They're probably the most voluptuous of all flowers. And also, they bring to spring that first flush of really intense colour. They have a silky vibrancy that almost no other flower has, and certainly no other at that time of year. And in fact, here in the Lime Walk, I'm planting white tulips. Now, last year I planted some Nicholas Hayek, which is a new tulip on me, lovely ivory, pale, pale yellow. And some of that will stay in there, but I'm going to top up with white Triumphator, and that's a tall, simple tulip with perfect white flowers that last for weeks and weeks. So next year, I get the mixture of the two. Now, tulips aren't cheap, so if you can buy them in bulk, they'll be a lot better value. And what you're looking for, however you get them, is a nice, healthy bulb. Firm, no sign of mould, and looking fresh. And a tip to get them looking reasonably natural is to put the same number in each bay, but don't try and plant them uniformly. Just squeeze them in between the plants. In this case, it's the wallflowers and Alchemilla mollis. Okay, now they're spaced out, and I would do the whole lot. I'd lay them all out on the ground before I planted the first one. Now, there's a big debate about the best way to plant tulips. You can either treat them as annuals, in which case you might as well just bury them under the soil, and they'll do fine, and they'll like the topsoil and feed well from it. Or you can treat them as a perennial, coming back year after year. That's tricky. You can only do that if you have really good drainage, if they get a good summer baking, and even then, it doesn't always work. But if you want them to come back year on year, you must plant them deep. And that means at least 4 inches, and if possible, 6 inches under the ground. Now, to do that, a bulb planter is a real help. This is perfect for tulips, the right size. So we take out a plug, and that's the start, but it's not really deep enough. So I want to work that out, get in there. You can see already it's a bit of a fiddle, and then get them in the ground. And that goes in, and it's covered over. Now that's fine. On sandy soil, not too difficult. But over the years, I've come to the conclusion that it's best to treat tulips as an annual. And if they flower again the following year, that's a bonus. That way, you get a really good display every year, and then you can top it up as the years go by. And planting them is dead easy. Simply with a trowel, loosen the soil, pop them in. That's it. And it does mean that you can get a lot in the ground pretty quickly.
Still to come, tomatoes, the best tools for your garden, and how to achieve a tropical look. But now to a gardening technique that gives aesthetically pleasing results, whilst being very practical too, especially in small gardens. With this tea, we're training trees.
So let's get twisting and turning with Toby Buckland.
Drawing influence from historic garden design is a brilliant way of enhancing your own garden. The art of training and manipulating trees into impressive living structures is one technique that's been around for centuries. And whether it's weaving hazel into a green and dappled tunnel, training fruit, or sculpting with topiary, there seems to be no end to our love affair with training trees. With that in mind, I've got an idea to use one of these techniques, pleaching, in my family back garden. Now essentially, pleaching is growing a row of trees, so they've got a clear leg, a trunk that comes up to a bushy top, and the tops are all trained horizontally so they grow one into the other and can be grafted together. So the whole thing becomes like a hedge on stilts, basically. Starting point are good chunky stakes. These are going to support a framework that I can train the branches of my trees down to. And I've hammered these in every 1.5 metres, every 5 feet. These are an ornamental crabapple, a wonderful tree that produces beautiful blossom in spring, and they're followed by these round apples. And here, grown as a hedge, it will screen off my veg patch nicely. Now, to make the framework, the material for this is a communal garden bamboo. This is going to provide the support in between those posts for the branches. pushed together and it's nice and solid. Put it in place on the posts. Now the longer bamboo cane down the middle makes all the difference to how easy this is. You can just rest it on the top like that while you tie the sides in place. And then it's on to the rest. Now onto the pleaching. Bend down branches that fit with the frame that I've created, so the branches that are spaced every 30 centimetres apart up the main trunk. I'm just going to loosely hold them in place with a twist of the wire like that. Doesn't want to be tight, because if it is, it can strangle the branch and kill it off. And I'll do the same on this side. You can see I'm already creating those beautiful tiers that will give this such a traditional and formal look. Now branches like this one that grow out from the main trunk between my bamboo framework, I'm just going to snip that back to a few buds. By snipping them off, not only will I get blossom on there followed by fruit, these little stubs with the leaves on will encourage the stem of my apple tree, the trunk, to thicken up. So eventually I'll be able to strike and dig out these posts all together, and the framework of bamboo will just be supported by the branches of the tree. So a lot more airy and light. And over the summer I'll get new branches forming. First on this tier, then the tier above, right to the top of the bamboo structure. And also over time, the hedge will get wider and wider. It really will start to look magical.
Training trees is something you can do even if space is at a premium. Here's Alan Titchmarsh with a few more tips.
There is a way of fitting fruit trees into the smallest garden, and that involves using what are known as single-tier espaliers, or commonly known as step-over trees. You need an apple tree like this on a dwarfing rootstock. That means it's never going to be one that you can sit under in your deck chair, but it will keep it small and in proportion to your garden. It's these sideways spreading arms, the first tier of the espalier, that you aim to keep, so anything which is coming up here needs to be snipped off. Sideways, lateral growth that you're encouraging here, not growth that's going to come upwards. But like all trees, even a small one like this needs to be planted to last. Spend as much on the hole as you do on the tree, and that means working into the bottom loads of well-rotted manure. Some in the bottom of the hole and some on the soil around, so that when you put the plant in, you can return it and mix it with that. Now, planting depth is quite important. Now these roots here, if they're really tightly bound in to that root ball, just tease them out of it. And then you can fill back with more manure and more soil, just firming it in with your fist or your welly as you go. Now, it's had canes to support it in the nursery while it's being trained, but I've put in a post and wire framework which you can tighten to give you a nice taut support. So the thing to do now is to take off these canes and gradually tie these horizontal stems back into that new wire. And once those little tiny plastic ties have come off and this cane has come out, you'll see that it's quite capable, really, of supporting itself, but not for long. And these now need to be tied in to make sure that they take to this framework rather than the previous one. I'm using plastic-coated wire here, which is fine for winding round that and then the stem. You can do this right the way along the stem. It's a lovely, satisfying job, this. There we are, we've got the makings of our step-over tree. The one thing that people worry about with fruit trees, of course, though, is pruning. The thing with these is it couldn't be simpler. Most of your pruning takes place in summer. That's why it's called summer pruning. And summer pruning tends to restrict growth, whereas pruning things hard back in winter encourages vast spring growth. So by pruning in summer and simply shortening these side shoots or laterals back to about finger length, you will build up the fruiting spurs, these short, stocky shoots that carry blossom and then apples. It looks incredibly simple. That's because it is. You will find in the middle, often enough, a shoot which is deciding, no, I'm sorry, I want to be a proper apple tree. I want to grow very, very tall. Don't leave it on. Cut it back to finger length. Now, 1 year on, you've got 5 fruits on this, but each tree can easily have a dozen of them. Feed them well every year, make sure they don't go short of water, and keep up this summer pruning. The great thing then, though, is, provided you've got an inside leg measurement of more than 24 inches, you'll see exactly why they're called step-over apple trees.
And we're staying with the ornamental use of trees and joining Rachel Detain. This time it's all about trimming, as our next tea is for topiary.
A visit to the gardens at Levens Hall is like taking a walk back through history. It's the best, the oldest, and certainly the most extensive topiary garden in Britain. Some of these shrubs and trees were planted more than 300 years ago, and the layout has barely changed since the 1690s. Some of the planting may change, and a topiary gets clipped, but above all, there's a real sense of continuity with this garden that links the past with the present and the future. Nestling in the northern topiary garden is a small house, which is where the history of the garden begins. This was built for the original designer of the garden, the Monsieur Guillaume Beaumont, back in 1690, and it's still their head gardener's house today. Since Monsieur Beaumont designed the gardens, there have only been 10 head gardeners. Currently occupying the title with a mere 15 years at Levens is Chris Crowder. Some of the topiary shapes are extraordinary. I mean, how much are you allowed to change those?
Well, they are amazing. Certainly some of them have been here 300 years, and basically we go around the outlines of the oldest and the biggest ones. But we are planting young ones of our own, and there's about a dozen down there that it's our generation that forms that shape, and the generations to come will have to follow our outlines. Most of them haven't got names. They're all different, of course. There's about 100 of them. But the great umbrellas, these huge ones above our heads, ideal for sheltering on a wet day.
Now, all I can see actually is this sea of bedding, all these people working on it.
Yeah.
How many bedding plants do you estimate you put in every year?
I don't know, it's about 10 or 15,000, and of course we change it twice a year, so we've been through the beds already, pulling all the spring pansies and tulips out, and it stocks this summer.
Well, I'd love to stay and help you plant all these, but actually, even better than that, I'd like to go and see the rest of the garden, so...
OK, we'll go for a walk.
Well, the first thing that strikes me, actually, is just how strong the garden is in terms of structure.
It certainly is. These great beech hedges running off into the distance in this direction.
How old do you think these are?
Before my time, before anybody's time, possibly 300 years old. We're certainly on a map of 1730. And you can see how gnarled these shapes have become, these pieces of beech, as we've clipped them year by year. And of course, how full of holes they are now. They're coming to the end of their natural lives, and it's a wonder some of them stand up, really.
It's a fantastic structure. It's almost like a cathedral, with bits of light just coming through where the gaps in the leaves.
Yeah.
And then you just come out into the light again.
Yeah, this is known as the beech circle, and in a way it's a quiet, still spot in between the big hits of the borders that way and the borders that way.
What is it, do you think, for visitors today that they love about the garden?
I think when they first come in, they're absolutely gobsmacked at the sight of this topiary, its age, its size, and the extent of it all. It's such a visual feast. Well, then I hope when they go around the rest of the gardens, they actually find a huge interest, really, in the borders. There's a lot beyond this particular patch of garden, as we've seen. It's also on a reasonable scale. It's only 6 or 8 acres, the entire garden, so comparisons can be made with home borders.
This is the man, isn't it? Monsieur Beaumont, gardener to King James II. He laid out the gardens at Hampton Court Palace and at Levens, so...
And at many other places, we believe, but Levens is the only survivor. Although it's got such a huge sense of history, it doesn't hang heavily round our necks. It's our garden to do with now, and next year, it's actually always developing, so it's a living garden right into the future.
That was really impressive. Now let's move away from the ornamental and head towards an edible garden. Up next is a fruit that loves the sun and turns up in most of our savoury dishes and salads. T is for tomatoes.
And we're out shopping with Alice Fowler.
The must for my salads are tomatoes. For me, they completely capture the taste of summer. But because they're so cheap to buy, I'm not going to bother to sow any. Instead, my friend Dave and I are heading off to a car boot sale where they sell young plants. Whatever you're buying, check that the leaves are healthy and take the plant out of the pot to make sure that the roots are well developed but not pot-bound. Do you know what tomatoes these are?
My mother-in-law grew them.
Okay.
She just gave them us yesterday.
Does she grow good tomatoes?
She does actually, yeah.
Do you know if she grows them in a greenhouse or outside?
In the greenhouse.
Okay, I'm going to take a gamble. How much are they?
20 pence.
If you don't want to gamble, it's best to buy plants which have been labelled, so you know exactly which variety of tomato you're getting. This 20p plant and this 50p plant have quite a lot of difference, and I'm beginning to slightly regret buying this one because this is a named variety, so I know where I'm going, and it's clearly a much healthier plant. So I'm going to put this down as a bit of a loss and buy one of these as well. But tomatoes have one big enemy, blight, an airborne fungus that can destroy the plants, leaves, fruit and all. And those growing outdoors are most at risk because the fungal spores spread through the air and thrive in our warm, wet summer weather. So I want to hedge my bets and keep one plant growing indoors as security. I don't have room for a full-size greenhouse, so I'm going to custom build my own with my handy friend Sid. Greenhouses serve two main purposes. They protect your plants from the cold and help to keep out pests and diseases. I want my greenhouse to be beautiful as well as effective, so I'm making it out of some salvaged 1930s windows, joined together by timber supports and angle brackets. All up, it's cost me £160. Okay, so it's a little eccentric, but I love it. It's about that way.
Mind your
Perfect.
fingers, go underneath. And we'll see if they fit.
Yeah,
They do, don't they?
yeah. It's really eerie light inside.
Yeah, open it out.
Yeah. It's going to be perfect. I broke my heart last year over tomatoes. I grew so many different varieties and I watched them all go down to blight. And so this year I said no tomatoes, I'm not going to grow a single tomato. It was my big protest to the summer. And yet here I am in May with a tomato. And it's thanks to the car boot sale because at 50p, if it doesn't work, if we have an appalling summer, if the blight comes back, well, I lost 50p. And if it does work, well, I have lots of lovely tiny tomatoes because Gardener's Delight is one of the best, easiest tomatoes to start off with. Tomato plants are hungry plants, so you need to feed them with a kind of vitamin tonic. There are bottles of seaweed feed that you can buy, but I prefer to make my own, for free, with nettles. I literally throw nettles into a bucket, add water, and leave them to rot. This makes an amazing, nutrient-rich soup, but be warned though, it smells revolting. Oh, God. The point is, it's good for the tomato, and if you want lovely tomatoes, you have to suffer a bit at the beginning. I've got one well-established tomato that a friend generously gave me a few weeks ago. That's the one I've chosen to closet in my new mini greenhouse. It's been out on the patio until now, so I'm moving it indoors and hoping for the best. But it's not all good news. As the days get warmer, the inevitable happens. Tomato blight arrives in the neighbourhood, killing all my outdoor tomatoes. As I garden organically, I don't want to use chemicals to fight it off. This structure is the only thing that's keeping me and the tomato in hope that we'll still get ripening fruit. If even a single spore gets in there, the whole thing is over. So far things are looking good, so if I only go in to water when necessary, I should get ripe fruit by the end of the month. It seems I spoke too soon. A couple of weeks later, and blight has reached into my greenhouse, shriveling my plants and making the fruit totally inedible. That's another year lost. I am resigned these days to the fact that I cannot really grow tomatoes, even when I try and build funny greenhouses for them. We've had lots of wet, humid, hot days, and this dear, beautiful, large, lovely plant is now riddled with blight. Black stems, black leaves, and eventually black fruit. This is truly heartbreaking. And so that's it. I don't think I'm ever going to bother with tomatoes until somebody brings me an honest-to-God, blight-resistant tomato and says you can grow it outside and it won't get it. But blight doesn't strike everywhere, so I don't want to put anyone off from trying, because there's nothing quite like the taste of a homegrown tomato.
Thanks, Alice. And now we're joining Toby Buckland, who's sharing some tips on how best to plant tomatoes.
These were sown back in March. Whenever you're planting tomatoes, it's essential that they give it a good drink so the compost is moist before they go in the ground. And there literally are so many ways to grow them. There are those that can be grown outside, and then ones that need a protected environment under glass. Now, there's also two types of tomatoes. There are those that are grown as cordons on long single stems and those as bushes. And I always think that in a greenhouse, the cordons are the ones to go for because they're more space efficient and you get heavier crops over a longer period. And the time to plant your tomatoes is when you notice flowers start to form on the stems. Now this is a cordon tomato, a variety called Rosada. Its party trick is that it has thin skins, and that's particularly good for greenhouse tomatoes because the sun streaming in through the glass can tend to thicken them. Before planting, because it's a cordon, what I'm going to do is remove the side shoots. Now these appear just where the leaves meet the main trunk of the plant. What we do is pinch them off, and that channels the plant's energy into producing a better crop of fruit. You don't need to worry that you're pinching off any flowers or fruit because those don't form in the leaf axils. They always form in between the leaves, just come straight out from the stem like that. As long as you leave those shoots on, you're guaranteed to maintain your fruit. Now the way I'm going to grow the tomatoes in here is using ring culture. It's a technique that's been around years. The ring refers to plastic pots with the bases chopped off them. Now these are important because tomatoes have two types of roots. They have shallow roots that gather nutrients, and they have deep roots that hunt for moisture in the soil. And by encouraging the shallow roots, the nutrient gathering ones, you can really boost the productivity of your plants. Now where these bottomless pots come in is in planting and looking after the tomato as it grows. I'm just going to set this one into the soil at the usual level, just covering the root ball. I'm dropping the pot over the plant, and then each week I'll carefully earth them up with a couple of centimetres of good compost until the pot is almost filled. This will encourage the plant to send out feeder roots that will soon fill the pot. And so I can start to feed the plant with my tomato fertiliser once the fruit starts to set into the container, so none of the food is wasted. When I want to water the plant, I water the soil around the outside. It really concentrates how well the plant grows and can improve performance drastically. Now I'm going to have a row of plants here spaced 60 centimetres apart. Because this is a cordon tomato, the main stem needs to be trained. You can use a cane to train your tomatoes up, but personally I like to use string attached to a cross-pole support. In this case, a piece of plumber's pipe. Simply tie the string to the top and then run it down to the stem of the plant and loosely tie it on. Each week, train the stem to wrap around the string to keep it tidy and productive, and don't forget to keep pinching out those side shoots over the coming weeks. If you prefer growing your tomatoes the traditional way in grow bags, plant no more than 2 plants per bag. This gives them the room they need to flourish. There are lots of horticultural products on the market like cane holders to keep your plants well supported in grow bags. Or there are bespoke ring culture pots similar to my DIY version that I used in the greenhouse. Outside, there are other tricks to use. And I'm going to plant my outdoor tomatoes in the veg patch of my family back garden. The most important thing when growing tomatoes outdoors is the situation. Full sun and shelter, they're essential. when growing in the ground, I like to prepare the soil with lots of compost and then stick stout canes in 2 feet apart in staggered rows. What I also do, it's a good trick this, is bury tin cans with the bottoms taken off them next to the canes. These act like funnels, making for fast watering during summer when you don't have a lot of time to get out to your plants. It just guides the water down to the roots where it percolates out from the cans for the plants to lap up. When it comes to varieties, there are specific types of tomato that do well outdoors. Look for varieties that are listed as early producers. So Red Alert, Gardener's Delight, they tend to grow quickly and crop quickly, so even if the weather turns bad, you do get some tomatoes. Another group of tomatoes to go for are those listed as Russian or from the Eastern Bloc. Koralik is one variety we're growing here that's particularly blight resistant, and this plant is called Black Russian. Has medium-sized fruits, they're mahogany and delicious, absolutely lovely, particularly in a sunny year. Because when the weather's good in summer, tomatoes grown outdoors, well, there's just nothing to beat them. The flavour is fantastic.
Any gardener knows that dedication and time are key when it comes to having a great garden, but there's also nothing like having the best kit for the job. Because our next tea is for tools, and Joe Swift and Carol Klein are sharing some of their favourites.
Well, you show me yours, I'll show you mine.
All right.
Well, you've got to have a fork and a spade, right?
Yeah, and these are my favourites. I've got quite a few, but these are the ones that I use all the time, and they were my mum's.
Oh, stainless steel.
Yeah.
Really nice size, aren't they?
Aren't they? You like that,
You get
don't
your
you?
breakfast with that
You
one.
could.
That's really nice. But it also shows you, you know, if you buy good quality stuff,
Yeah.
it'll last, well, several lifetimes.
Yeah, and with people like me, who leave the stuff out all the time.
Yeah.
Stainless steel it really pays for itself.
Yeah, it won't
really
last.
does. But what about that, Joe?
Well, this is brilliant on the allotment. An Azado.
They use them all around the world.
Well, yeah, all over the world. I mean, they come in all sorts of shapes and sizes. This is quite a big one, and some of them got a little sort of 2 prongs at the back. There's a guy on my allotment called Michael, who does everything with it. He digs with it, he weeds with it, he plants with it, and he harvests with it. You can just do so many things with it,
Yeah.
especially leaning on it, though.
Yeah. No, you're a man of the soil, Joe. I just see you using that all the time. But, you know, some of the tools I use most.
Chopstick, you're famous for your chopsticks.
But they're so good, you know, for pricking oats. They're just ideal. Seed planting if you're station sowing.
I'm converted. I've been watching you on the telly.
You haven't,
I have, and now my missus is going, where's the chopsticks gone? And I've got them on the allotment or in the garden. They're brilliant, really good tool.
That's it. They're ideal. But this is probably the thing that I use most. It's my penknife.
I've seen a bit of action.
Yeah, I dread to think how many cuttings I've taken. But it's
Lovely knife.
it's simple, straightforward, does the job. That's the thing, isn't
no, it's
it?
a really nice knife, that.
It's beautiful, isn't
Surprised
it?
you haven't lost that one. Well, here's something that's maybe not so beautiful an object, that's for sure.
Well,
cable ties.
Yeah.
OK? These are brilliant. But I was at Gardeners World Live last year, and I'd started the allotment.
Yeah.
And someone said, oh, you know when you tie your bean poles in and you do your avenues of bamboo canes and stuff? Cable ties, cable ties. Yeah, so I went off to the shop, bought a bag,
Yeah.
and they're brilliant because, you know, you don't need to tie knots, and they keep things really tight.
it's a man thing, isn't it?
Is it?
Getting excited about a cable tie. Can you undo them, though?
Well, you can. You need a knife, but you can actually undo them.
Yeah.
Yeah, go on. They are reusable. They're reusable, recyclable. If you just slip a knife in there,
Yeah.
and then you slide it out.
Hey, brilliant!
Yeah,
Fantastic.
Not a lot of people know that.
No, what you need now is a really good knife.
That's
Can't
true.
have this one.
I'll do a swap.
No, thanks.
With the basics covered, we're going a bit wild now, as our last tea is for tropical gardens. And this one is based, believe it or not, in the West Midlands.
My name's David McKenna and I'm a butcher by trade. I've been a butcher all my life and I'm 57 years of age. I had a traditional garden with the lawns and all your normal one-of-your-mill plants, but I wanted something different and it was a case of I'll try and make a jungle. And I went to this chap's garden and I seen a banana tree. I went, wow, that was it, and I never looked back. Five years ago, 6 years ago, when we actually started the tropical garden, it was a case of there wasn't that many tropical plants about, so you had to subsidise by using English-looking plants for large leaf. And then now it's getting better. because of all the climate change, and the nurseries are getting more adventurous. It's a case where it started off with Chinese, it's in Japanese. I've gone further afield now to call it Indonesia. I mean, I can just put any plant I can put my hands on. When I went to Thailand for the first time 4 or 5 years ago, as soon as I got off that airplane, it was the case, I'm home. Because no matter where I looked, there was plants I just fell in love with, and I didn't want to come home. And I've been back ever since. I've got no favourite because they all suffer with jealousy. If it's a case where I spend a little bit more attention on one, the others all start sulking. So if it's a case they all have the same amount of care, and there's not one favourite plant at all, and that's hand on heart, that is. Oh, but the summer, it's quite easy. It looks after itself. You just go around with your pair of scissors or clippers and just tidy them up as they go along. I like to go around with the old watering can or the hose pipe. By doing this, you can actually look at the plants, and if they need that extra bit of care or attention, or is it in the wrong place, I'll just move it about, find its level of happiness. In the winter time, a lot of the plants, I have to walk around and I take up about 50% of the plants. Now I either take them up, pass them up, put them in cold storage or in a greenhouse where they need to be temperature controlled, or some of the harder ones I can leave outside covered in straw with jackets on so they're all nice and snug. But I've still got a nice display at any given time through the winter, even the winter months. With the bamboos and the cordyline and just the ordinary trees. The garden is actually 80 foot in length by 60 foot at its widest point because it narrows down. But I made the garden longer and bigger by so many paths, and that was only like an evolution thing where you used to just have a path down the garden. And of course, when you come into a garden, if you see it all in one spot, that's it, the surprise is over. But if you put barriers there and start giving pathways going round, it gives people more time and yourself to walk around, and you've got more control on plants, and you can actually put more plants in. So if you do a pathway, it's a case where I've gained more space, but you haven't lost anything in plants. You've always got more room in the garden for plants. As long as the wife's out shopping or at work, you can bring as many plants as you like.
It's always amazing to see all the different things people can do with their gardens. That's all from us today. Until our next A to Z of TV Gardening, goodbye.